Welcome back to another episode of our podcast. Today, we are going to talk about a timely and relevant topic. I say it is relevant because it involves something we use every day and a problem that is very prevalent nowadays. When we talk about vaccine misinformation on social media, it is easy to assume the problem is simple. People are exposed to false or misleading information, and as a result, they form incorrect beliefs about vaccines. But if we stop there, we're missing something important. Because the real question isn't just why misinformation exists, it is why people find it convincing in the first place. Why is it that a short TikTok video or personal story or even a post from a stranger online can sometimes feel more trustworthy than decades of scientific research? Why do individuals sometimes reject the conclusion of entire scientific communities while accepting claims that are unsupported or even clearly false? In other words, why do people often trust peer-generated information on social media more than scientific expertise when it comes to vaccines? More importantly, what does that say about how we form beliefs? Because this is not just a scientific or public health issue, it is a philosophical one, specifically an epistemological problem. So first, we define epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, of how we come to know things, how we justify our beliefs, and how we distinguish between reliable and unreliable information. When we ask why people trust social media over science, we are really asking what counts as good evidence? Who should we trust? And what does it mean to form a rational belief? These questions become even more important in a world where information is everywhere. We live in an environment where we are constantly exposed to competing claims. Scientific studies, news articles, personal experiences, and opinions, all presented in the same space, often with no clear indication of which sources are more credible. So, to answer this, I'm going to combine philosophy and science and draw on ideas from thinkers like Timothy Caulfield, Naomi Oreskes, and Carl Sagan, as well as empirical research on misinformation, vaccine hesitancy, and trust in science. Because ultimately, this is not just a medical issue, it is a problem about knowledge itself. So let's start with a simple idea. Most of what we know, we don't verify ourselves. We rely on others, and this is called testimony, and it is central to epistemology. For example, I don't personally conduct vaccine trials or analyze epidemiological data. Instead, I rely on scientists, doctors, and public health institutions to interpret that information. Philosopher Alvin Goldman argues that this reliance on experts is not only normal, it is necessary. In complex societies, knowledge is distributed and individuals must depend on those with specialized expertise. Similarly, Naomi Oreskes argues that science works because it is a collective process. Scientific knowledge is not based on one person's opinion, it is produced through communities of experts that test, critique, and validate each other's work. This means that trusting science is not about trusting individuals. It is about trusting a system designed to produce reliable knowledge. And when that system works, it is one of the most reliable ways we have of understanding the world. But social media changes everything. On platforms like TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook, expert knowledge and personal opinions are presented in the same way. There are no clear signals telling you who is credible and who is not. This leads to what we call a collapse of epistemic authority, where expertise no longer stands out as more reliable than opinion. And this has measurable effects. A systemic review by Cassini et al. In 2022 found that exposure to vaccine-related content on social media is significantly associated with increased vaccine hesitancy. Researchers describe the current digital environment as an infodemic, which is a situation in which both accurate and inaccurate information spread rapidly, making it difficult to distinguish between them. And importantly, some studies done in 2020 show that misinformation often spreads faster than accurate information because it is more emotionally engaging and attention grabbing. Timothy Caulfield argues that misinformation thrives in this environment because it prioritizes simplicity, emotion, and narrative over scientific complexity. So the issue isn't just that misinformation exists, it's that the environment is designed in a way that makes misinformation more appealing and more visible. So why do people trust peer-generated information more than experts? First, social media is dominated by personal experiences, stories about vaccine side effects or fears, and these stories feel real and immediate. But scientifically, they are of weak evidence. They are anecdotal at best and not representative of larger populations. Research shows that anecdotal misinformation can strongly influence perception of risk. Zimmerman et al. In 2022, along with other studies, have found that exposure to misinformation increases vaccine hesitancy even when scientific evidence is available. Carl Sagan warned about this tendency. He argued that humans are naturally drawn to compelling stories, even when they lack evidence, and that without scientific thinking, we are vulnerable to believing things that simply feel true. Another key factor is social identity. We tend to trust people who are similar to us, people who share our values or experiences, and social media amplifies this by creating communities where beliefs are reinforced. This then leads to what researchers call echo chambers, where individuals are primarily exposed to information that aligns with their existing beliefs. Studies show that individuals are more likely to accept misinformation when it comes from sources they perceive as familiar or trustworthy. So instead of asking, is this supported by evidence? People ask, do I trust this person? And this is exactly what Oreskes warns about. When trust shifts from scientific institutions to personal networks, the reliability of knowledge decreases. Third is that social media platforms contribute to the flattening of epistemic authority. Traditionally, expert knowledge was filtered through institutions such as academic journals, medical organizations, and professional bodies. These institutions served as gatekeepers, ensuring that information met certain standards of credibility before being disseminated to the public. In contrast, social media removes these filters, allowing all forms of information to circulate freely. And experts and non-experts are presented side by side, often with no clear markers of authority. And furthermore, algorithms prioritize content that generates engagement, such as emotionally charged or controversial posts, rather than content that is accurate or evidence-based. Lastly, another important factor is overconfidence. People often believe they understand complex scientific issues better than they actually do. And this is known as the illusion of explanatory depth. On social media, this problem is amplified. People are exposed to simplified explanations and may feel confident in their understanding even if it is incomplete or simply incorrect. And this contributes to the idea that individuals can evaluate scientific claims independently even when they lack the necessary expertise. This then leads to the idea of epistemic autonomy, the belief that individuals should think for themselves rather than rely on experts. At first glance, this sounds like a good thing, but there is a problem, and evaluating scientific evidence requires specialized knowledge, understanding the methodology, statistics, and peer review. Philosopher Neil Levy argues that being a responsible thinker involves recognizing the limits of your own knowledge. Caulfield also points out that doing your own research often leads people to rely on unreliable sources while rejecting expert consensus. So instead of improving understanding, autonomy can lead to misplaced confidence. Now, there are, of course, important objections. First, some argue that distrust in science is justified. To be fair, there have been historical cases of unethical practices in medicine which have shaped public perception. Just like Caulfield mentioned, there is bad science, and science is sometimes wrong. And the public does not understand the critique part of science, and they just see scientists disagreeing with each other, which fosters distrust. Second, people may say they are simply thinking critically, questioning authority rather than blindly accepting it. And third, some argue that emphasizing expert authority limits personal freedom and independent thinking. These objections, of course, matter, but they don't fully solve the problem. Even if distrust is justified, it does not mean peer-generated information is more reliable. Rejecting expert knowledge does not make weaker evidence stronger, and regarding critical thinking, Sagan emphasizes that skepticism must be paired with scientific reasoning. Without that, it becomes belief driven by intuition rather than evidence. And while autonomy is important, it must be balanced with epistemic responsibility. Goldman argues that rational individuals should defer to experts in domains where they lack knowledge. And recognizing your limits is not irrational, it is essential to forming justified beliefs. So, what does this all mean? The persistence of vaccine misinformation is not just about false information. It reflects a deeper problem in how we form beliefs. Social media shifts trust away from expertise toward relatability, identity, and emotion. And this leads to belief forming practices that are not always reliable. So the real question becomes, in a world where information is everywhere and authority is unclear, how should we decide what to believe? Because answering that question is not just important for public health, it is essential for understanding knowledge itself. If you enjoy these types of discussions, don't forget to share and subscribe. Thank you for listening.